you want to become president, you're going to have to come here to the Red Arrow Diner in Manchester, New Hampshire, and meet the voters.
No, no, no. This is Mary Ann's Diner in Derry, New Hampshire. If you want to be president, you have to come here and meet the voters and shake hands with them. Meet them.
Actually, all of the presidential candidates must come here to the New Hampshire State House to register as candidates with the Secretary of State.
Let's go inside and talk to the Secretary of State now to find out what's being done to keep New Hampshire's primary #1 in the nation.
Hi, I'm Lainey Law.
And I'm Attorney Andrew Myers.
Today, we're with New Hampshire Secretary of State, David Scanlan. We're going to be talking about the New Hampshire primary. David, how are you doing today?
Well, I'm great. It's nice to be with you today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it. It seems to me in the past, scheduling the New Hampshire primary, although a little bit tricky, was pretty much perfunctory, but it's kind of confusing this year. The Democratic Party said that we're going to change the whole thing and upset the apple cart, and South Carolina is going to go first. And so now I guess there have been some other complications. Iowa has said, well, we're going to go in January 15th. So can you give us a brief update of what's going on and what are you watching right now?
Sure. Well, historically, New Hampshire's first in the nation primary has really always been challenged. There have always been at least one or two or even three states that have wanted to jump ahead of New Hampshire to try and steal some of the attention and the notoriety that we get by holding the first in the nation primary. This time around, however, is probably the most significant challenge that we've ever had, because the National Democratic Committee, as an organization, has tried to reset the calendar, pushing the traditional early states back into the pack. In fact, they've pushed the Iowa Democratic Caucus out of the early calendar altogether, and they have pushed New Hampshire behind South Carolina to hold a primary on the same day that Nevada holds their event.
Right. So I see, according to their schedule, South Carolina has been scheduled for February 3rd. What are the complicating factors? Why can't you just say, okay, we're going to go first and set it a week before that?
Well, we have a state law that says that New Hampshire holds first in the nation primary, and that primary shall be at least 7 days before any similar event. South Carolina holds a primary, so there's no question that our law dictates that we will go at least 7 days before South Carolina holds their primary. But there are other moving parts too. We're not sure what the Iowa Democrats are going to do yet. We have a general idea. There may be other states that are still thinking about making adjustments. But New Hampshire's law is so flexible that it allows us a great deal of independence in when the date actually gets set. In fact, the statute gives the Secretary of State the sole authority to decide when that date is going to be. Whereas the other states usually have either the legislature or the political party committee or some other entity that is a board or a commission that sets that date. So New Hampshire has a tremendous amount of flexibility and the ability to move rapidly when making the decision. And we have the luxury of being able to wait until the last possible moment to make that decision.
Okay, so I asked you before about South Carolina going on February 3rd. Now, Iowa's caucuses have done something odd this year. Maybe you can explain it more from your point of view, but they've now set the caucus in Iowa for January 15th. And my understanding was always in the past, didn't the Secretary of State of New Hampshire say, okay, gentleman's agreement or whatever you want to call it, if they set their date for January 15th, we'll let them have their caucus and we'll go a week later. Wasn't that the general agreement in the past? And why can't that work anymore?
Well, New Hampshire and Iowa historically have worked really well together and supported each other in maintaining the status of the First in the Nation caucus and then the First in the Nation primary. And the The Iowa Republicans are the ones that have set their date for January 15th. And if you look at that schedule closely, you can see that they scheduled it far enough ahead of South Carolina that they have created a window for New Hampshire to fit in between and comply with the statute that says we shall go at least 7 days before a similar event. What we're following in Iowa is the fact that the Iowa Democrats have decided to hold their caucus on the same day as the Iowa Republicans, but they want to change their caucus up to be more inclusive of voters generally in the state by adding some type of a mail-in balloting component. The minute that they do that, however, they start looking more primary than a caucus. And that's something that obviously we're going to have to follow very closely to see how that might affect our scheduling.
So what are you looking at there? I mean, you said that there's enough wiggle room in between the South Carolina date of February 3rd and the Iowa caucus date of January 15th. So yeah, if you went 7 days after the January 15th day, let Iowa have their moment in the sun, you'd have enough time before February 3rd. Why can't you just automatically kind of, snap your fingers and walk away from it?
Well, that would be nice if we could do that. However, if the Iowa Democrats start creating an event that starts looking like a primary, even if it's incremental, it's going to force us to trigger the law related to the Democratic Iowa caucus / primary. And so, I think there is a lot of pressure on the Iowa Democrats to just have a traditional caucus. We'll see if that's what they do or not, because the Iowa Republicans want to make sure that their date is not superseded by New Hampshire scheduling a primary ahead of them.
So if Iowa's caucus starts to look more like an election primary, what do you do? What if the Democrats in Iowa say, too bad, New Hampshire, we're going to do it our own way? What do you do if it does look more like an election?
Well, we will follow our law. And really, that's about all I can say at this point, because, beyond that is speculation. And, and it is important to just be matter of fact with the facts as we know them at this time, and then react as developments take place.
How late can you go? I mean, these things are happening in January and February, and I know, it might look like a long time away from the date that we're actually recording this, but how late can you wait? Can you wait until after the holidays? You have to print ballots. You have to send them up to Pittsfield and down to Keene and over to Portsmouth. How much time can you wait?
We still have a lot of time to make a decision. Obviously, we have to make sure that we have time to send absentee ballots out to the voters. We have to make sure that the municipalities have polling places lined up on short notice. Many of those polling places are held in schools. So we have had a conversation with the Superintendents Association just to let them know what the situation is, and ask them for flexibility about having a short notice and allowing towns to use the schools as polling places. And I think that we're going to get a lot of cooperation there, because this event for New Hampshire is so important.
Well, it's a big, big thing. But I mean, again, let me rephrase the question. And how late can you wait? Can you wait until after the first of the year? It would seem to me that's way too late. How long can you go before you have to actually set that date and do all the things you just talked about, printing the ballots and getting them approved, et cetera?
I think we could go into December if we had to. But we'll be following what's going on in the other states. And once we're comfortable that they're locked in, we can set the date. And it'd be nice to be able to do that sooner rather than later, but we could certainly go into December.
There's been talk of Iowa actually holding their event, whatever they want to call it, a caucus or a primary, on two different dates, one for possibly Democrats, one for possibly Republicans. That couldn't happen here, could it?
No, no, but in Iowa, the political parties run the nominating event, and their law does not restrict when the parties can hold that event. New Hampshire, the state runs the primary. The state pays for the primary election. The state runs the primary election, and we've always held both the Democratic and the Republican primaries on the same day. Frankly, it would be really a logistical nightmare to try and separate the primaries by parties and hold them on different days, forcing the local communities to set up polling places twice, print checklists off twice, and basically run elections in close proximity to each other. So I don't believe our law permits splitting the primary up, and I don't see that happening in the foreseeable future.
Well, plus it would also be kind of confusing and impractical in that, married couple, it's not unusual for one spouse to be a Republican and the other spouse to be a Democrat. I'm an independent, and sometimes, you wait until the last minute to decide. So, I mean, you're making two trips to the polls. Now, to switch the subject a little bit, I've been accused of being naive. Okay, I'll take that criticism before I ask the next question. But the next question would be, I know the Democrats took the vote that they took to kind of push New Hampshire aside and do whatever they want to do, which has complicated the situation. Has there been any effort to maybe talk to the Democrats and say, hey, look, let's be reasonable here. Let's let New Hampshire do what it's been doing for 100 years. Is there any hope of this changing between now and the time the snow flies?
I would say at this point that is not likely, but we'll have to see what develops. I know that New Hampshire has representation on the Democratic National Committee. I know that the party chair and the national committee persons, have been arguing New Hampshire's case for years. The congressional delegation is all Democratic, and I know that they have been, lobbying their party, and they've not had much success this time around. So we'll see how this plays out. I know that that part of what the Democratic National Committee did when they set the calendar said that New Hampshire will only hold its place on the same day as Nevada, as provided that they repeal the law that says that we have to go at least 7 days before any similar event, and pass a law that would create an early voting opportunity. Well, neither one of those things happened during the last legislative session. And when it became obvious that that was the case, the Democratic National Committee said, well, we will give New Hampshire until early September to see if they can make those things happen. Well, there's absolutely no effort on New Hampshire's part to try and make those things happen. September is coming up pretty quick, and so we will see what else develops in that regard. But it's not going to change the way New Hampshire behaves in this process.
In doing my research for this podcast before talking to you, I went on your website and I saw a very interesting article that I think you posted about the history of the current law passed in the 1970s, in which New Hampshire, the primary has been the first since the 1920s, 100 years, but then in the 70s they were challenged. And I read a really interesting article that I believe you posted about how this is such an important thing for New Hampshire that both the Democrats and the Republicans sat down together and worked together to make sure that this remained first. And I found that very fascinating. Based on what's going on in politics today, people are saying, oh, the nation is more divided now than it ever has been, which I don't agree with. But nonetheless, you had Meldrum Thompson, who was way over on the right, and Portsmouth Senator Jim Splain, who is a Portsmouth liberal Democrat. And the two of them were sitting on the couch working this whole thing out. And I found that very fascinating. And I don't know, have there been any behind the scenes negotiations or talks that you're aware of to try and change things?
Well, as was mentioned in that article, preserving the New Hampshire First in the Nation presidential primary is one of the few areas of partisan agreement in New Hampshire, and it's really a great thing to see. One of the primary criticism, or the criticisms that are made from around the country on why New Hampshire should not hold its first in the nation status, is that the state is too white ethnically, that it is a privileged state, it's a wealthy state, it's a well-educated state. And all of those things may be true, but from my perspective, the people that are mentioning that are missing the point or trying to obscure the point on the real reason why New Hampshire is so important. New Hampshire was one of the original 13 colonies, and when our forefathers crafted our state constitution, there was a general mistrust of government. And so they decided to spread that power as broadly across the population of the state as they possibly could, which is why New Hampshire has the largest state legislature, numbers-wise, of any state in the country, 400 members in a state of almost 1.4 million. And the governor doesn't have sole power as the chief executive. He has to have the approval of the governor's council, the executive council, when approving contracts and appointments to state government. So there are a lot of checks and balances in our system. And because of that, we are truly a government of the people. And it's the average person that, that has a say in how our state is run. And so that translates to the national politics, where it is very easy for anybody, any United States citizen that meets the constitutional requirements to be president, to come here, be able to run a campaign without high name recognition and a great deal of money, and take their case to the people here, and they have a shot. They may not win, but they could do well. And at least they're able to pursue, that American dream that many fourth graders have of growing up to be president of the United States.
Well, absolutely. My first presidential primary, I met Jimmy Carter in person, personally. And a lot of people back then were saying, Jimmy, who?
That's right.
I mean, that kind of makes your point that, he was not favored when he first came. I met the guy. He was a very bright guy, but he was very personal. He would take time to sit down and talk to you and have a little bit of a chat. But to your point, the demographics of New Hampshire are changing. I've only been here for 50 years, but it seems to me that the demographics are changing. But the thing that we were alluding to in our failed attempt at humor in the beginning of this podcast is that you can meet your presidential candidates. You can actually sit down and meet them. I've met a lot of them. I'm sure you've met 10 times more than I've met, but you can go to these diners. You can go to house parties. You can go to local events. The TV station holds a event where they invite people over to St. Anselm's, and people can actually go and meet the president. I've talked to people in other states, and they are jealous of that because by the time the primaries move to places like Pennsylvania, New York, and elsewhere, those people have no opportunity to even meet the candidates. By that point, the primaries and the events are all held in the TV stations. They're all held in ABC, CBS, NBC in New York. They're all held in Pennsylvania. I know for a fact that the candidates never go anywhere other than Pittsburgh, Philly, and if you're lucky, Harrisburg. So if you live in Lancaster, or you live in State College, or you live in Erie, you don't have a chance. So that's something that, and these people can come here. They all have relatives here. That's one of the things that makes New Hampshire so important is, so my first point was, A, the demographics are changing, but B, we get a chance to meet these people. And I'm sure you've met tons of them over the years, haven't you?
Oh yeah. I've met all the major candidates and twice as many lesser known candidates that come into the office. And But that is really important. I mean, I think the political parties, the individuals that run the political parties nationally like to have a controlled setting for their preferred candidate. New Hampshire and Iowa drive them crazy because they can't control the outcome.
Right.
It is retail politics, and the people of New Hampshire get to vet those candidates and make a choice and say this is who we recommend to the rest of the country. But because those other states are either so large geographically, or they have multiple media markets where it's very expensive to run, it starts eliminating the ability for many candidates to participate in that process. That's why
Sure.
regional primaries and national primaries are such a bad idea, because you really limit the field.
Yeah, because the people in those larger states are never actually going to meet a candidate, where people in Manchester can go over to the Red Arrow and they're gonna meet the candidates.
Yeah.
Please don't be offended by the next question. Please don't be offended by this next question, but I'm just going to ask. Bill Gardner was the Secretary of State for years and years and years and years and years, a very nice man, but also a very professional man. And he retired. Do you think he retired because he saw the handwriting on the wall and he didn't want his name on the first primary that wasn't the first?
No, and I'm not offended by the question. I worked closely with Bill for 20 years before he retired, and he just felt that it was time to to move on and let things progress. I mean, he was a strong proponent and defender of the primary for 46 years, and he was here through the 100th anniversary of New Hampshire holding the first in the nation primary. So there really wasn't a whole lot more for him to accomplish. I think that he felt that, that the law that we currently have is strong enough to withstand future challenges, and it was time to let other people make sure that position was maintained. So
okay.
I had
sorry.
learning a lot from him. I don't expect that we're going to lose it under my administration. I certainly hope.
Good. I think one of my last questions now is, and I know you don't have a crystal ball over there in your office, but I'm going to ask you, do you think that the current derailment of the first in the nation primary status in New Hampshire is in part due to the fact that our current president didn't do well? He made the dog-faced pony soldier comment. He saw the handwriting on the wall late in the evening in the last primary, and he took off and went down to South Carolina, where he didn't do well in New Hampshire. He did really well in South Carolina, and now they're being rewarded. They're getting the first primary that the Democrats will recognize. Note, I didn't say the first primary that the Democratic Party will recognize. Do you think that New Hampshire's challenge this time is in part, temporary, and things will return to normal the next cycle around? I know you don't have a crystal ball, but
I think each primary is unique. I haven't spoken with the president to hear firsthand what his thought process was in the calendar that he set up, but it certainly looks like reward and punishment. He placed fifth in New Hampshire in the last primary, and South Carolina salvaged his nomination. So you can read into that what you want. I think that moving forward, we'll see what happens. I think it's up to New Hampshire to speak loudly about why it is important that we continue holding the first primary. Nobody's going to promote New Hampshire like New Hampshire can promote itself. I don't think we can rely on other states to do that for us. So we're just going to have to be vigilant and aggressive, and do what needs to be done.
Okay. What am I missing here? Is there anything going on behind the scenes? I feel like we're talking about everything that's been in the news and we've seen in the papers. Is there something that I'm missing here that's going on behind the scenes that maybe a rabbit will jump out of their hat at the last minute and we'll go first? Or are you talking with other secretaries of state in Iowa or anywhere else? Is there anything else going on that I'm missing?
No. there are really no formal conversations that are going on between the two states. I think New Hampshire, just like a good sports team, you just have to stick with the fundamentals. And New Hampshire knows how to run elections, and we do that very well. I think we're a model for the rest of the country, and I think we just have to make sure we keep doing that. And
Do you think that all of this confusion is going to affect voter turnout?
No, I expect that we're going to have a good voter turnout in the presidential primary, even on the Democratic side, if Joe Biden's name does not appear on the ballot. And then I think the way things are lining up now, I would expect that we could have another record turnout in the November general election in 2024.
Okay. Mr. Secretary of State, thank you very much for your time. I know you're a busy guy. You have not only the elections, you have the corporations and a lot of other stuff. So thank you very much for taking some time out of your day to talk to us, and all the best in trying to manage this whole thing. It seems like an insurmountable job, but all the best to you, sir.
Thank you. It's great to be with you today.
Have a good day.
Thank you. I really feel like I learned a lot.
Yeah, David Scanlan has a tough job. He's been there for a long time, but when the Secretary of State that preceded him, Bill Gardner, who did a fantastic job, also retired, Mr. Scanlan took over, and I wouldn't want his job. What a job he has. Good grief.
Oh my God, a superhero, especially in moments like this where, sometimes, at least from the public, people, the public might think that people have more power to control the situation, and why can't Iowa just, get their act together?
Well, it's not only Iowa, it's South Carolina, and the Democratic Party as a whole is not happy with New Hampshire because the current occupant of the White House did not do well in New Hampshire. In fact, he left before the evening was over during the last primary. So, I think the Secretary of State has a lot of pressure on him, and he seems to be very congenial about it. I mean, he still has some time, but I think it's really important to keep New Hampshire's primary first, and not just for the most obvious reasons. I mean, the restaurants and the bars and the whole business of hotels, they say it's important for them, and I agree with that. But I think it's more important because it puts New Hampshire on the map. New Hampshire is a very small state. We only have 4 electoral votes. We only have 2 Congress people. And so the New Hampshire primary really puts New Hampshire into people's minds nationwide. And if we didn't have it, the Californias, the New Yorks, the Texases, they would take all the glory. And now with this primary, New Hampshire gets some attention. It puts us on the map. And so I think, for a lot of reasons, it's really important. And I hope they are able to preserve it in New Hampshire, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my thing too is, it's kind of weird that it's like it's never been an issue. Well, not ever, but like it's been, this has been going on consistently for like 100+ years. It's weird that it's just a random change, I would say, just to happen. It doesn't need to be like this, there doesn't have to be a question about it.
No, I know. And as I think you were going to point out, I mean, it's been this way for a long, long, long time. But I think there are forces within the party that want to return things. I mean, in the old days, rather than putting the power into the hands of voters, people that could go to a diner, go to a house party, do things like that, they often would go into the back rooms of a convention where there was a lot of smoke. And they would, kind of, horse trade. And, well, if you, promise to give us this appropriation, maybe we'll look more kindly on your guy as a vice president. And that, in the old days, that's how things were. And the good thing about having a primary in a state like New Hampshire is that, people have a chance to make that connection with actual candidates.
It's a good point you bring that up. Let's go take a look into our Wayback Machine to see what things used to be like.
Okay. Boy, I miss the old days of picking the president in the back rooms. This New Hampshire stuff is for the birds.
But when candidates come to New Hampshire for the primaries, they get to actually talk to people at diners, special events, restaurants.
Yeah, it was so much better back when I used to meet in the back rooms, you know. We would smoke our cigars, have a little bit of whiskey, then we picked who was going to run this country.
But New Hampshire is a small state. That's why it's important for candidates to be able to talk one-on-one with people.
Small state phooey. The big states are better because we can control everything with money. I mean, sure, we have the media bought. I mean, you know, NBC has that Todd guy. ABC has Stefan Nothing. PBS, they're in the bag. We know best.
But that's exactly why it's important to have fair and honest elections where the voters can actually know who they're voting for.
That live for your die stuff, that's for the birds. Leave it to us in the back rooms. We know best. My cigar!
Woo-wee, look at all that smoke. Wow. Thank you guys. If you made it to this point, thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like the video, and let us know what other topics you'd like to see in the future. It's been a pleasure going through this with you guys today, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one.
Yep. Thanks for being with us. Have a good one. You have been watching About the Law, a production of the law offices of Andrew D. Myers in Methuen in the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts and in Derry, just outside of Manchester, New Hampshire. Remember to click the like and subscribe buttons down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to share it with your friends and others. If you'd like to talk to me about an injury case, a car accident, a slip and fall, a serious bodily injury case, or some other case, please feel free to contact me. I'd love to talk to you. You can contact us through my website at attorney-myers.com. We have a contact us block, or you can call on one of the telephone numbers we've given there, or you can email me at andrew@attorney-myers.com. The foregoing is offered for informational purposes only. It is not intended as and does not constitute legal advice. Laws vary widely from state to state. You should rely only on the advice given to you during a personal consultation by a local attorney thoroughly familiar with state laws and the area of practice in which your concern lies. This podcast must be and hereby is labeled advertisement in some jurisdictions.